Data and research, injury, fatalities and surveys.
Great.
River Paul, Director of Data Analysis. I'm Dr. Rebecca Newton. I'm the Branch Manager for the Chemicals, Occupational Hygiene and High Risk Work and Construction Policy Branch.
Right.
I'm Bill Smith. I'm the Director of High Risk Work and Construction Policy.
Thank you.
I'm Mckee. I'm Acting Director of WHS Framework.
Right, look, thank you very much, everyone. Now, I think I'll probably look towards you, Ms Bryant, but anyone else to make the opening statement.
We don't have an opening statement, thank you, Senator, only to acknowledge, of course, today's World Day for Safety and Health at Work and Workers' Memorial Day, so we certainly acknowledge the importance of this inquiry focusing on safety as does our agency, and take that opportunity.
All right. Well, look, that's great, because I'll have a few questions around safety, but I would like to give Senator McDonald a call, because earlier on we had the Australian Livestock Transporters Association, and they got another initial in there nowadays, Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association, and they were very, very critical about the state of loading facilities for livestock, and they talked predominantly on farm is one of the biggest problems, but they also said in some of the abattoirs and some of the sale lots. So I'm sure, and I know Senator McDonald will have questions around that, but have you done any work in that area? They said that they have been so frustrated trying to raise it with the local authorities. Ms Bryant, did you?
Senator, not off the top of my head, but would be happy to take on notice any material that we do have in relation to that. Certainly agriculture is an area of focus under the Australian Work Health and Safety Strategy, so livestock would obviously fall under that. We, unfortunately, I think we're probably in transit.
Oh no, we'll come back to road transport, don't worry about that.
Yeah, when that
you were in transit?
When that group was on,
okay.
We'd certainly appreciate the chance to go back and review their submission. Good. And evidence today and see if there's anything to contribute.
That's good, because Mr Munro did mention some figures, and it was quite alarming, 87% of injuries and that sort of stuff. Senator McDonald, you'd have a foot in each camp, are you?
Thank you very much, Senator Sterle. And I did listen carefully when Safe Work made the observation that they had come with their transport people as opposed to, is there anyone there who's able to answer questions on safety for unloading and loading of livestock from trucks, from transport?
We can certainly talk in general terms about how the model laws operate.
Let's give it a go, Senator McDonald.
Terrific, thank you. I'd like to hear from you on what your observations are around safety for operators, both on farm, at abattoirs, rail heads, on loading and interactions with livestock across the state for transport.
Okay, so in general terms, we could supply any data that we have on notice in relation to that particular aspect. I guess what we'd emphasise in terms of the model laws is that persons conducting a business or undertaking, including those working in agriculture, in livestock, on heavy trucks unloading livestock, they certainly do have duties in relation to managing and identifying risks to work health and safety. So I guess not being familiar with the particular practices the Senator's referring to, those industries are covered by the model work health and safety laws and are subject to the same duties as any other employer or business. Was there a question about how the model laws cover those particular industries, or are you more interested in regulator activity, for example, in those fields?
Well, both. Yes, if you could explain how the model laws apply, and then what sort of oversight that Safe Work or other jurisdictions have.
Yeah, so I guess the first point to make is that Safe Work Australia itself is not a regulator, so we're a tripartite body made up of representatives of each state and territory and social partners through the ACTU and relevant employer bodies. So we don't actually have a role in enforcement and compliance, so we can't speak, I guess, to the nature of what may or may not be happening on the ground. Certainly, loading and unloading is an area subject to significant burden of injury. I guess we see that through our data. I don't know if Dr. Newton or Mr. Smith might want to make any particular comment around livestock in particular.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I guess there could be multiple duty holders when we get to this kind of situation. There'd be the farm owner and also the transport company. They would have duties of care to the worker to ensure safe systems of work in these instances, and they'd have to undertake appropriate risk assessments also.
Right. Well, I guess we have, and in the case of abattoirs, we would have the yard owners being, or in Queensland, it's usually Horizon, as opposed to the abattoir operator. So it all gets quite complex, doesn't it? Who holds the duty of care? Is that right?
Yeah, it does. So there could be multiple persons conducting a business or undertaking that scenario, and each would have a duty of care to ensure a safe system of work for the worker in those instances. That's essentially, there could be a shared duty in those instances where there's a farm owner, abattoir owner, or a transport service provider.
And who provides the oversight for the operation of that legislation? So, for example, in Queensland, WorkCover is the workers' compensation provider. How does that interact with Safe Work?
So the regulator in Queensland is WorkSafe Queensland. So they would investigate any issue. For example, if someone was to raise a concern, they are the body that would go out and ensure compliance with the Work Health and Safety Act in Queensland. From time to time, Work Health and Safety regulators as a body, there's the heads of work health and safety authorities. They from time to time do discuss issues of common relevance across the country and identify operational issues that may need to be addressed and referred to Safe Work Australia as the national policy body. So when that occurs, sometimes Safe Work Australia members will consider the adequacy of the model framework to cover certain types of situations, but in general terms they would be covered by Work Health and Safety laws. They're broad in application, and it would be WorkSafe Queensland that would investigate where there was an issue. All
right, terrific. So, okay, I'm just understanding the reporting function. Terrific. Thank you, Senator Sterle. I think that probably brings me to the end of my piece.
All right, so if I can just add on there, if you could come back to us and let us know, please, that, and as in the words of the Australian Livestock and Rural Transport Association, it's falling on deaf ears. No one's doing anything, so if you can follow that, that'd be great. Now, you talk about the Australian Work Health and Safety Strategy for 12-22.
Yes.
Can you bring us up to speed? What did you find out about road transport and what have we done to rectify it?
So under the Australian Work Health and Safety Strategy, Safe Work Australia members as a combined body own and implement that document. So at the moment we're actually commencing preparations for the next Australian strategy, and as part of that work we are looking back over the last 9 years of the current strategy's operation and doing a piece of work where we do seek to collect and analyse lessons learned through that period. So certainly in terms of targets under the strategy, those have been met and exceeded for industries such as road transport. There's still a long way to go, and we're considering carefully what targets or indicators and data we may need to amass or collect for the next strategy. But in terms of the targets, in general terms, they have been met. So that's a reduction in the fatality rate and also reductions in the prevalence of musculoskeletal injury as well, which are both significant for the road transport sector. Down? Yes, okay. By a significant margin. So my colleague Ms Hutchinson would be able to tell you the trend over time in terms of the fatality rate.
Yeah, from the start of the strategy, it's actually decreased 44% using the 2019 data. I'm happy to provide the updated data on notice.
If you could do that, that would be great, because every time I try and find out how many people have been killed in the road transport industry, you know, and I don't mean cars running into trucks on suicide missions, which we do know. I actually want to know how many truck drivers have been killed. I get different figures all the time. It's just, it does my head in.
Yeah, so there are obviously a number of data sources that relate to road transport. Ours is around traumatic injury fatality. So there's certain, we're looking at the work-related component. So that's where our data, for example, would deviate from what BITRA collect, for example.
And that's what I'm keen to see, because there's also, we talk about deaths. Deaths are easy, that sounds terrible, we count them. Injuries are a lot harder to find out what the heck is going on too. Do you have a lot of figures around that? You obviously do have figures around that.
Views around
injuries.
So we use the compensation statistics as an indicator of the prevalence of work-related injury in Australia. So that doesn't necessarily give it's an efficient proxy measure for the level of injury, but of course not all workers would necessarily be covered by workers' compensation arrangements, but it does give us a good indicator where the burden of injury lies and how that's tracked over time, which is also decreased. I don't know, Kyra, if you've got the numbers to hand.
Actually, so we use both frequency rates and incidence rates to kind of have a look at the serious claims and how they've decreased over time. So over the last decade, the frequency rate of serious claims in the road transport industry has decreased by 34%. And so when we talk about frequency rates, they're expressed as a number of serious claims per million hours worked. So over time, that has decreased.
And what are the KPIs for the next 10 years? Is it 10 years you're doing?
The next 10 years, that's yet to be determined, Senator. So we'll be looking at the range of data sources that we have, the type of information that we'd like to collect, even if there is no existing data set for that. We're certainly mindful of other strategies in the space and are looking at those nationally and internationally to kind of look at best practice for, where the strategies even should have targets, what kind of targets they should be, what kind of information is the best to inform, and we'll be doing a range of targeted consultation around that.
Okay, now what about fatigue? Do you work in that space too? Do you actually go in there and see if the drivers are getting quality sleep? Does that affect some of the workers' comp claims, some of the injuries? I know for a fact, I'd have to say yes, it does. Because a lot of our truckies aren't getting a decent night's sleep. There's headlights coming through or other trucks are pulling in and out. So tell me what you do there.
Certainly in terms of the risks of injury, well aware that fatigue is a massive one that still, there's obviously still work to be done there to combat that, and the risks of fatigue, resulting in fatality or significant injury. We don't investigate that. I think I heard you ask that question. We certainly, as I mentioned before, because we're not a regulator, we're not going in and looking at the causes of those specific incidents, but we certainly do, look at the research that's coming out, for example, to understand how those risks interplay with injury. Yes,
because I mean, it's simple. If a driver says, "Oh, I fell asleep at the wheel," that's easy. But do we go back further and say why? Why did you fall asleep at the wheel?
That would be a matter
for
the
day, or?
The accident investigation teams, so we don't have a role in that.
Okay. All right. In that case then, look, is there anything else you wish to add? Because I am keeping an eye on the time for the, and what I have worked out is the states that are doing this, so we have to talk to the states, but if you could take on board what we did raise, that's good. Thanks very much.
Yeah, we'll certainly report that back to our member body. Happy to take those questions on notice, and particularly we're happy to have a look at what we've got in relation to livestock. But yeah, thank you for the
really would encourage you to do that, because the frustration from the livestock is relevant, and it was raised, I think, in Melbourne too, Paula, wasn't it? If I remember rightly about that. And it just appears that our truck drivers, if they drove off the farm or drove out of the sale yards and they exceeded the speed limit, the coppers would be on them like a ton of bricks. If they had made a spelling mistake or didn't fill out their work diary or their logbook, the gendarmes would be all over them. There goes a week's pay. And yet when they raise, hang on, what about our welfare where we're breaking fingers or falling off of crappy bits of infrastructure that were fit for the 1800s or something? No one's doing anything. That's, if you could follow that for me, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that intelligence, and we'll certainly do that.
All right, thank you very much. I'll let you go back. You're Canberra-based, obviously.
Yes.
Oh, we haven't got far to go.
It was about 300 metres up the road. So
Oh, you'll be back in time for a Lamington and a cuppa, so safe travels. Thank you very much.